There is a specific kind of cold that comes with standing on a sidewalk in November with a 4-year-old on your hip and a single duffel bag at your feet, watching your family's car pull away from the curb. It is not just the temperature. It is the understanding arriving in your body before your mind has fully caught up to it. The understanding that the people who were supposed to be your floor just became the ones who dropped you. My daughter Avery had her face pressed into my neck. She was not crying. She was at that age where she read my energy more than her own fear, and I was holding myself very still. I could feel her eyelashes against my skin. I could feel her breath, warm and even, completely trusting that I had this under control. I looked up at the building in front of us. Red brick, 3 stories, a modest sign above the door that read Cornerstone Women and Family Center. A light on inside. The outline of someone moving behind the frosted glass. I had not been inside this building in 4 months. The last time I was here I had been wearing a hard hat. My name is Renee Whitfield. I am 31 years old. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, in a house that always smelled like my grandmother's cooking and my mother's disappointment, which are 2 smells that do not cancel each other out no matter how hard you try. I have one sister, named Paula, 5 years older, who married a man named Craig when she was 24 and immediately adopted his opinions about everything, including me. I have a mother named Loretta, who loves her children unequally and has never once acknowledged that fact. I do not say these things with bitterness. I say them because they are the foundation of the story, and a foundation matters. For most of my life I was the quiet one, the practical one, the one who did not cause scenes or demand things or take up space in a way that inconvenienced anyone. I paid my bills on time. I showed up when I said I would. I helped my mother when she asked and sometimes when she did not ask because I could see she needed it. I was, by every visible measure, a good daughter. What I was not was impressive, by my family's particular definition of that word. I did not marry young. I did not have a house in a suburb with a good school district. I did not have a husband whose income could be mentioned at family dinners as evidence of my worth. What I had was a degree in business administration from Indiana University, a job I had worked my way into at a commercial real estate firm in downtown Indianapolis, and a quiet, private financial life that I had never discussed with my family because I had learned very early that telling my mother or Paula anything real about my circumstances only gave them new material to either dismiss or weaponize. What I also had, by the time the night at the shelter happened, was Avery. Avery's father, Marcus, left when she was 11 months old. I am not going to spend a lot of time on Marcus because he does not deserve the airtime, but the relevant facts are these. He left. He did not leave me for someone else. He did not have a dramatic reason. He simply decided that the life we were building was not the life he wanted, and he walked away from it with very little ceremony and even less guilt. He pays child support because a court order ensures he does. He sees Avery 4 times a year because that is what he agreed to and not because he fought for more. When Marcus left, my mother's response was not sympathy. It was a version of "I told you so," delivered in the gentler language of concern. You never really knew him, Renee. I always thought he seemed uncommitted. I tried to tell you what she meant, and what she said more plainly to Paula, who told me later with the particular relish that Paula reserved for delivering bad news, was that I had made my bed and now I was going to have to figure out how to lie in it, preferably without becoming her problem. I became very motivated around that time. Here is something I understood about my family that took me years to articulate clearly. They were not cruel people in the obvious way. They did not scream or hit or disappear entirely. They were the subtler kind of harmful, the kind that uses love as a lever that gives just enough to maintain your dependence and withholds just enough to maintain their control. My mother had opinions about everything I did and delivered them in the tone of someone doing me a favor. Paula reinforced those opinions because agreeing with our mother had always been the path of least resistance in our family, and Paula was nothing if not efficient. The result was that I had spent most of my adult life being quietly managed by people who believed they knew better than I did what I was capable of. I decided, at 30 years old with a toddler and an absent father and a mother who viewed my situation as a personal embarrassment, that I was going to stop letting that be true. The real estate firm where I worked was called Hargrove and Associates. I had been there for 6 years, starting as an administrative coordinator and working my way to a junior acquisitions role, which sounds modest but is less modest than it sounds. My boss, a woman named Sandra Hargrove, who had built the firm from a 2-person office in the late 90s, had taken a particular interest in my development, not because she was warm and mentorly in the way people imagine, but because she was practical and she recognized a certain quality in me that she said she saw in herself at my age. She called it containment, the ability to hold a lot internally without it showing on the outside. Sandra taught me things that no one in my family had ever thought to teach me: how to read a property evaluation, how to assess a neighborhood's 5-year trajectory, how to structure a holding company so that your personal name does not appear in the first layer of a public search. That last one she taught me almost offhandedly, the way you mention something obvious, but I wrote it down and I did not forget it. In the spring of the year Avery turned 3, a property came across my desk that I was not supposed to be evaluating at my level. It was a distressed commercial building on the Near East side of Indianapolis, 3 stories, brick construction from the 1940s, a solid bones building that had been vacant for 2 years following the closure of a non-profit tenant. The asking price was low because the roof needed work and the electrical system was outdated, and the previous owner was in a estate sale situation where the heirs simply wanted it gone. I looked at that building for 3 weeks before I said anything to anyone. I ran the numbers 6 different ways. I researched the neighborhood development plan. I looked at the zoning, the grant, landscape, the social services infrastructure in that corridor. And then I called a woman named Deborah Sims, who ran a family advocacy nonprofit that I had been quietly donating to for 2 years, ever since Avery was born, and something in me became very alert to the reality that single mothers with nowhere to go were everywhere and the resources for them were never enough. Deborah and I had coffee. I told her what I was thinking. She sat across from me and did not say anything for almost a full minute, and then she said, "If you are serious about this, I will help you build it right." I was serious. I bought the building through a holding company I registered as Clearwater Property Solutions, LLC. My name was not on the public-facing documents. Sandra co-signed the acquisition loan and took a minority stake as a silent partner because she believed in the project and also because she had the financial standing to make the loan terms workable. The renovation took 8 months. We hired Deborah's organization to manage operations under a long-term lease agreement. The shelter opened in March, 14 months after I first saw the listing. I told no one in my family, not because I was planning what eventually happened. I want to be clear about that. I was not laying a trap. I simply knew from long experience that telling my mother or Paula anything before it was fully formed only invited their interference, and this was too important to me to risk being talked out of it or diminished while it was still fragile. I visited the building twice during renovation in regular clothes with no hard hat once I realized the staff might mention it to someone. I signed documents from my home office. I attended board meetings over video call from my car in parking garages. I was careful the way I had learned to be careful, quietly and completely. The shelter was real. It served real families. In its first 9 months of operation, it provided emergency housing to over 80 women and children in crisis. Deborah ran it with a staff of 12 and a volunteer network of 40. I was on the board under my holding company's name. I sent flowers when the first family transitioned to permanent housing. I was proud of it in a way I had very rarely been proud of anything, a private, settled pride that did not need anyone else's acknowledgement to be real. And then my family found out I was living in Marcus's old apartment. This requires some explanation. After Marcus left, I had stayed in our apartment for 2 years, partly for stability for Avery and partly because the rent was reasonable and I was directing every available dollar into savings and the building project. The apartment was in a part of Indianapolis that my mother considered beneath me, which meant she considered it beneath her, and she had been lobbying me to move since before Marcus even left. When Paula mentioned it at a family dinner in September, that I was still there, still in that apartment, still in that neighborhood, my mother decided that something needed to be done. What my mother meant by something needs to be done was that she and Paula and Craig would take a coordinated approach to convincing me that I needed to move somewhere they approved of, which in practice meant somewhere close to them, somewhere they could monitor and advise, and occasionally rescue me from my own decisions. I declined, politely at first and then more firmly when the conversations kept recurring. moving. I said I was happy where I was. I said Avery's daycare was nearby and my commute was manageable, and I had no interest in moving across town to be closer to people who had very clear opinions about how I was raising my daughter. That last sentence was the one that cracked things open. My mother took it as an attack. Paula amplified it as only Paula could, adding context and interpretation and history that transformed a statement of preference into evidence of a character problem. Craig, who had never particularly liked me and whose dislike I had always understood to be rooted in the fact that I did not defer to him the way Paula did, said something at a subsequent family dinner that I will not repeat here because the specific words are less important than their function, which was to establish that the family consensus was that I was difficult, ungrateful, and in need of intervention. The intervention came on a Wednesday evening in November. I had come to my mother's house for dinner because Avery loved my mother's cooking even when I found the evenings exhausting, and I had been trying to maintain some version of a functional relationship for my daughter's sake. I arrived at 6. Avery ran to my mother immediately, the way she always did, and my mother scooped her up and was genuinely warm with her, which was one of the true and uncomplicated things about my mother. Her love for Avery was real even when everything else was complicated. Paula and Craig were already there. That should have told me something. We ate dinner. It was fine, the way those dinners were always fine on the surface while something ran underneath. Craig talked about his job. Paula talked about their plans to refinish the basement. My mother asked Avery questions about daycare and Avery answered with the details enthusiasm that 4-year-olds bring to everything. I ate and contributed when spoken to and watched the clock. After dinner, my mother asked Avery if she wanted to watch a movie in the bedroom. Avery said yes immediately, because she always said yes to movies, and my mother settled her in with a tablet and came back to the living room and sat down. That was when I understood it was a setup. My mother started. She said she had been thinking about my situation for a long time and that she loved me, and that was exactly why she needed to say some things that might be hard to hear. Paula nodded continuously like a metronome. Craig sat with his arms crossed in the particular posture of a man who has already decided the outcome of the conversation. What followed was approximately 40 minutes of coordinated pressure. My apartment was not safe enough for Avery, my mother said. My financial situation was more precarious than I admitted, Paula said. I was isolating myself and that was not healthy, my mother said. I needed to think about what kind of example I was setting, Craig said, which was rich coming from a man who had never once asked me a genuine question about my life. I sat very still. I answered quietly. I said that I appreciated their concern and that I was managing well and that I had things under control. I used Sandra's word, containment. My mother's expression shifted when I said that. It became something harder. She said that she had spoken to a woman at her church whose daughter had been in a similar situation and had moved back home for a period, and that it had been exactly what she needed. She said there was room in this house. She said Avery could have Paula's old bedroom. I said no. Paula said that I was being prideful. Craig said that pride was a luxury I could not afford. My mother said that she was not going to watch her granddaughter grow up in an unsafe apartment because I was too stubborn to accept help. I said, again, no. I said it clearly and without apology, and I looked at my mother when I said it. Something shifted in the room after that. I felt it before I could name it. A decision being made, collectively, in the silent language that families who have operated together for decades develop, a language I had grown up inside but had never fully been included in. My mother said that if I was not willing to make reasonable choices, then she was not in a position to keep enabling my situation. I asked what that meant. She said she would no longer be available for childcare. My mother had been watching Avery 2 afternoons a week. It was the arrangement that made my work schedule possible. Losing it without notice would have required me to restructure my entire week within days. I kept my face very still. Paula said that she and Craig had also talked about it and they would not be able to help with the things they had been helping with. The things they had been helping with were almost nothing. The occasional grocery run, driving Avery to a birthday party once. But the way Paula said it implied a burden being lifted. Craig said that sometimes people need to reach a bottom before they are ready to make good decisions. I looked at my mother. I asked if this was what she wanted. She said she was doing what she believed was best for me and for Avery. I asked if she understood that withdrawing childcare without notice created a real practical problem for me. She said she was confident I would figure it out and that the sooner I understood that my current situation was not sustainable, the better. I stood up. I went to the bedroom and told Avery the movie was going to have to finish another time and helped her put on her shoes. She could feel something was wrong, but she did not ask. Because 4-year-olds who grow up with attentive mothers learn to read the energy of a room before they learn to read words. I came back to the living room with Avery on my hip and my bag on my shoulder and my duffel, which I had brought because I had planned to leave some of Avery's things at my mother's for the childcare days, still by the door. My mother said she thought it would be good if I stayed somewhere else tonight. She said it in the tone of someone suggesting something reasonable. She said Paula and Craig were going to stay over and it would just be easier. I understood then that this had been planned before I arrived. The dinner, the movie for Avery, the coordinated speeches, and now this. The message was clear. Leave, and do it in a way that feels like your idea. I picked up the duffel. I put Avery in her coat. I walked out the front door. They followed us to the car, which surprised me. My mother stood on the porch. Paula stood just behind her. Craig stayed in the doorway with his arms still crossed. My mother said she had called ahead to a place nearby, a women's shelter on the east side, and that they had space and that it might be exactly the wake-up call I needed. She said she had the address. I want you to understand what happened in my body in that moment, because I think it matters. I did not feel the thing you might expect, which is collapse or panic or the hot flood of humiliation. What I felt was something quieter and colder and entirely steady. I felt the past 18 months of early mornings and hard hat visits and holding company registrations and Sandra's voice on the phone saying, if you are serious about this, I will help you build it right. I felt all of that settle into place like a foundation under my feet. I said, fine. I said, give me the address. My mother looked slightly surprised that I had agreed so easily. She read it as defeat. She gave me the address. It was Cornerstone Women and Family Center. I put Avery in her car seat. Paula climbed into Craig's car. My mother got into the passenger seat. They drove ahead of me, presumably to make sure I actually went, which I did. I followed their taillights across town in the November dark, and I thought about Deborah Sims and the staff of 12 and the 80 families in the first 9 months and the flowers I had sent when the first family transitioned to permanent housing. They pulled over half a block from the building. I pulled up to the curb in front of it. I got out and got Avery out of her car seat and picked up the duffel, and I stood on the sidewalk. My mother's window came down. She said she hoped I would take this seriously. She said she loved me. She said sometimes love meant making hard choices. I said I understood. She rolled the window up. The car pulled away. Paula did not look back. Craig stared straight ahead. I watched them go. Then I turned to the building. The light inside was on. I could see Deborah's night coordinator, a woman named Tasha, moving behind the frosted glass. Tasha had worked for Deborah's organization for 3 years. She had been hired onto the Cornerstone staff when we opened. She knew my name. She did not know my face from a shelter visitor, because I had been careful, but she knew the name on the holding company documents and she knew the name on the board minutes. I pressed the buzzer. Tasha opened the door. She was mid-sentence in a welcome greeting, the automatic warm, professional welcome that shelter staff develop when she looked at me. Then she looked at the name on the sign-in sheet I had reached past her to pick up. Then she looked at me again. She said, Ms. Whitfield? I said, hi Tasha. I am sorry to come in like this. I said it quietly because Avery was already half asleep against my shoulder. I said, can we come in? Tasha stepped back from the door. She said, of course. Please. I want to pause here for a moment because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking about what happened next, about the moment my family found out, about the phone calls and the expressions on their faces. And I am going to get there, I promise. But I want to stay in this moment a little longer because it is the one that meant the most to me, more than any of what came after. Standing in the entrance of that building with my daughter asleep on my shoulder, looking at the intake desk I had chosen, the paint color I had approved, the furniture Deborah and I had selected, together because we wanted it to feel like a home and not an institution. Looking at Tasha, who was looking at me with an expression I still think about, not pity, not shock, something closer to recognition, like she was seeing the full picture of something she had only had pieces of before. I was not a woman who had been abandoned by her family at a shelter. I was the woman who had built the shelter so that women who were abandoned would have somewhere safe to go. Both of those things were true at the same time. That is a strange thing to hold, but I held it. Tasha made us tea. She found a cot in a quiet room for Avery. She did not ask questions that night. She just moved around us with the practiced gentle efficiency of someone who understood that the most important thing in that moment was to make us feel safe, and she did. I sat in the small common room after Avery was asleep and I called Sandra. Sandra answered on the third ring. I told her what had happened. There was a silence on her end. That lasted long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped, and then she said, "Are you and Avery all right?" I said yes. She said, "Okay." She said, "Do you need anything tonight?" I said no. She said, "Call me in the morning." That was all. That was enough. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning I called my office, arranged to work remotely for 2 days, and enrolled Avery in a temporary childcare program that the shelter ran for resident families, which I had funded as part of the operational budget 18 months earlier. Then I called a property management contact I trusted and asked him to start looking at apartments in the school district I actually wanted for Avery, not the one my mother approved of, the one I had been researching quietly for a year. I did not call my mother. I did not call Paula. Deborah arrived at the shelter at 8:30 that morning. She knew I was there because Tasha had sent her a message the night before. She came straight to the common room where I was drinking coffee and working on my laptop, and she sat down across from me and said, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" I told her. She listened the way Deborah always listened, completely and without interjecting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I wanted to find an apartment. I said I wanted to get Avery into a good school situation. I said I wanted to keep doing the work we were doing at Cornerstone, and I wanted none of what had happened to change any of that. Deborah said, "None of it changes any of that." She said it like it was obvious. I found an apartment within 10 days. 3 bedrooms in the school district I had chosen, ground floor unit with a small yard, in a building owned by a property management company I happened to know is well maintained because I had evaluated it as an acquisition target 2 years earlier. I moved us in on a Saturday with help from 2 colleagues in Deborah and Tasha, who showed up with a truck and did not ask to be thanked. I did not tell my mother I had moved. She found out 6 weeks later when she tried to drop something off at the old apartment and was told by a neighbor that I had gone. She called me 4 times that day. I let the calls go to voicemail. The messages moved through a recognizable arc. The first was brisk and practical. The second was warmer and slightly confused. The third was her version of an apology, which was not actually an apology but was the closest she typically got. The fourth was Paula calling from her own phone saying that our mother was worried, and could I please just call? I called Paula back that evening after Avery was in bed. I kept the conversation short. I said I was settled and Avery was fine and I would be in touch when I was ready. Paula started to say something about how the family had only been trying to help, and I said, "Paula, I know what you were trying to do." And then I said something that I had been thinking about for 6 weeks, something I had been trying to find the right words for. I said, "I want you to know that the night you drove me to that shelter, you drove me to a building I own. The shelter director works for me. I have been on the board since before it opened. I purchased the property and oversaw the renovation, and I fund part of the operational budget through my holding company. That is where you took me when you decided I had hit my bottom." The silence on Paula's end was the kind that has texture to it. She said, "What?" I said it again, more slowly. I did not elaborate. I let the information exist without decoration. Paula said, "You own that building?" I said yes. She said, "Renee, how did you?" I said, "I worked for it. Same way I worked for everything I have that none of you knew about, because I stopped telling you things a long time ago, because telling you things only ever gave you something to use." Paula did not respond to that directly. She said she had to call our mother. I said that was fine. My mother called me 11 minutes later. I will not transcribe the full conversation because it was long and it moved through several phases, but the shape of it was this. First disbelief, then a version of "but why didn't you tell us?" Then something that sounded like hurt but was really closer to embarrassment, then a pivot toward credit, a suggestion that surely some of my stability had come from the family support she had provided over the years, which I addressed clearly and without cruelty but also without allowance. And finally, eventually, something that was closer to genuine. She said, "I did not know you had built all of that." I said, "I know." She said, "I thought you were struggling." I said, "I know you thought that." I said, "But here's what I need you to understand. The reason you thought that was not because it was true. It was because you needed it to be true so that your version of our relationship could stay intact. The version where you are the one who knows better, where I am the one who needs managing. I have never fit that version, Mom. I just stopped fighting it out loud." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What can I do?" I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not the dramatic answer and not the easy answer, but the real one. I said, "You can stop deciding what I am capable of before you ask me. You can let me show you who I actually am instead of who you decided I was when I was 22 and scared and you mistook that fear for my ceiling. And you can understand that Avery is going to grow up knowing exactly what her mother built and what her mother is worth, and I am not going to let anyone, including you, put a smaller number on that than the real one." My mother said, "I hear you. It was not a full reconciliation. I want to be honest about that. These things do not resolve in a single phone call. What happened over the months that followed was slower and less cinematic than people might want it to be. My mother came to see the apartment. She walked through it quietly and said it was beautiful and meant it. She asked about the shelter, about Cornerstone, about how it worked and who it served, and I told her, and she listened in a way she had not listened to me in years, with real attention, without the overlay of her prior conclusions. Paula and I are still in the process of something I do not have a clean word for. We have had honest conversations that we did not have before. She told me once, in a moment I did not expect, that she had always been aware on some level that our mother treated us differently, that I was held to a different standard, and that she had not pushed back on it because it had always benefited her to let it stand. That was a harder thing to say than I think she got credit for. I told her I appreciated her saying it. I meant that. Craig and I do not have a relationship. That is fine. Some things do not need to be repaired. Avery started kindergarten in the school district I chose. Her teacher told me at the first parent conference that she was one of the most self-possessed children she had worked with, which I took as the highest compliment I have ever received. Cornerstone Women and Family Center served 114 families in its second full year of operation. We expanded the childcare program. We added a job readiness workshop. Deborah was recognized by the city council last spring for her work and gave a speech that did not mention me by name because I had asked her not to, but that I watched from the back of the room with the particular quiet satisfaction of someone who knows exactly where the foundation is buried. Sandra and I are still partners. She called me the week after everything happened with my family and said, "I always thought containment was your greatest skill. I am revising that. I think it is. Patience. I keep that." Here's what I want to say to you, whoever you are watching this from wherever you are watching it. Being underestimated is painful. I am not going to pretend it is not. There is a particular exhaustion that comes with being consistently seen as less than you are by people who are supposed to know you best. It wears on you in ways that are hard to name, because the damage is not dramatic, it is cumulative. It is the thousand small moments of being spoken over or managed or handed a ceiling and told it is a gift. But here is the other side of that. When people underestimate you, they stop watching you. And when they stop watching you, you can build things in peace. I did not set out to teach my family a lesson. I set out to build something real. The lesson was a side effect. And honestly, the lesson mattered less to me than the building. The families that slept safely at Cornerstone did not care whose mother had driven her there. The children in the childcare program did not know anything about Paula or Craig or a November night on a sidewalk. The work was real regardless of what my family understood or did not understand about who I was. That is what I want you to take from this if you take anything. Build the real thing. Not to prove something to the people who doubted you, though that will happen as a natural consequence. Build it because the thing itself matters. Build it because you are capable of more than the people who love you imperfectly have allowed themselves to see. Build it quietly if you have to. Build it in parking garages, on video calls, and in early morning hours, and in the margins of the life people think they know you are living. Build it and let it be true before you let anyone else have an opinion about it. My family drove me to a shelter on a November night because they believed I had nothing. What they did not know is that I had built that shelter because I understood what it meant to have nothing, and I had decided a long time ago that understanding was not going to be the end of my story. It was the beginning. Thank you for being here with me tonight. If this story meant something to you, leave me a comment and tell me what you took from it. Subscribe if you want to hear more, and share this with someone who is building something in the quiet right now and needs to know it is worth it. I will see you next time.